With your permission, I'd like you to bring to mind the most intense moment of your life. And you can't name a moment in 2020 because that year is just canceled, right? Think about a time when you were bent, stretched, or moved, maybe something really positive or something really negative. Did that moment make you, or did that moment break you? The difference has to do with something we call resilience, literally our ability to snap back into place after we've been pushed or pulled. Take, for instance, this little tree. It's in the forest, it's surrounded by its peers and elders, and when the wind blows, it stays rooted. It maybe loses a few leaves, maybe makes a few new roots, but it is intact and snaps back into place. What about this little tree, rooted in a bit of concrete with no peers or elders to surround it? When this storm comes, it struggles immensely to maintain and to snap back to what it once was before. Now, we might think that something about those trees, something about us, something about communities that makes them more or less resilient. But as a trauma surgeon, I'm less interested in the tree and more interested in the wind. Wind is energy and trauma is energy transfer. And when our bodies get energy transfer, when our hearts and minds experience energy, whether it's a bullet or a lost car or an empty bank account or a harsh word, we have a response in our bodies to that energy transfer, which initially starts as a fight, a flight, or a freeze. Now, this response is the response of your brain that keeps you alive. And I'm going to tell you, it's not very sophisticated. Your cat can have a trauma response just as complicated as running away, fighting, or freezing. But after we get through that trauma response, the rest of us kicks in and starts to try to explain what just happened. It's as if that energy transfer, that energy that gets put into our minds, bodies, and souls has to balance, has to make sense so that we maintain power over our bodies and ourselves. Now, I have been in situations with people experiencing the worst days of their lives. I have told people that they have lost their children. I have consoled people who have lost parts of their body, people who will never walk again. And once they go through that fight, flight, or freeze response, the next question is almost always, why? Why did this happen? And there's some kinds of trauma that make that why almost impossible to answer. Coronavirus, a viral pandemic that has changed the entire world. Opiate use and the chronic pain it covers that is taking the lives of people in this city and in this country at an alarming amount. Homelessness, the results of all of our greed and the inability to make sure people have what they need. And bullets, the vectors of death that slice through our city and our world in ways that are devastating beyond the flesh that they pierce. Around the same amount of people have lost their lives to coronavirus, bullets, and opiates in our city this year. It is an astonishing amount of trauma that we have experienced. And what I worry about for us and our resilience is not who has roots in concrete and who has roots in a forest, but how we will think about the wind in our storm. You see, I've learned a lot from seeing the common bond between these four very, very different forces that are doing actually very similar things in our lives as a community. And what I have learned is the deafening power of a wind you cannot explain. Now, I want to give you an example to flush out what that feels like, that not knowing, that not explaining, that emptiness that comes when you are hit with energy that you cannot control and you cannot explain. In the show, The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, one of Will Smith's most brilliant moments in his acting and early acting career was a scene where he is interrupted by or he's visited by his father, his estranged father, who is the whole premise for the show, right? He is there with his uncle in Crazy Carlton because he has been denied the love of his father. And in this scene where his father shows up unexpected and then leaves, damaging and traumatizing Will Smith's character again, he talks with his now father figure uncle and says, I'm not going to be that kind of man. I'm not going to raise my children that way. I will define what love is. But then he breaks, and in that moment embraces his now father figure saying, how come he don't want me, man? You see, the trauma that comes into our lives and says that we are not worthy is a trauma that does more than just break or bend us. It's a trauma that makes us blame ourselves for the wind. There's another movie scene that really brings this all together for me, and that's from the show Good Will Hunting, where a similar father figure reaches out to a troubled youth, Matt Damon's character, and he's going through this file of abuse and trauma, and he looks at him in the depth of their relationship, and he's holding the file in his hands, and he said, you know, son, you know this? You know this? It's not your fault. And he repeats it. And he repeats it until Matt Damon, just like Will Smith, is melted into this giant bear hug and realizes that the wind is not his fault and never was. One of the keys to our resilience as a community is going to be this: to not blame ourselves and each other for this wind. It is not your fault. It is not my fault, and it has never been. St. Louis, US, worlds, we have the power within to be resilient as long as we don't spend our time blaming ourselves and each other for that wind.